First NFC division, correct? Yeah.
Yes.
So we have the Packers, Vikings, Bears, Lions. You want to go into a little bit?
Yeah, so I mean, we had a pretty good division here in the NFC North. Usually you don't see three teams in the division out of four have a 500 or better record, and that's what we saw at the NFC North. We had the Packers, we had the Vikings, and we had the Bears. Very competitive last season. Obviously, the Lions, they lost Matt Stafford pretty early on into the season. I think about midway into the season, that kind of just had all their playoff hopes, all their just team aspirations kind of go right out the window as they had very poor quarterback play after the departure of Matt Stafford. But I mean, looking at these teams, obviously, again, you had the Packers win the division. They went 13-3, but they did not win a playoff game. People kind of pegged the Packers as one of the worst one seeds of all time, one of the worst 13-3 teams of all time, which is pretty amazing to think about. Then you have the Vikings, who are the only team in the division to win a playoff game last year, played very good in the playoffs, just barely lost in the second round. And you have the 8-8 Bears, who had a very up and down season again with Mitch Trubisky. But getting into some of these teams' off seasons, I think me and Sam were both surprised to see. We believe each team, except for the Lions, really got worse in the off season, and I really think the NFC North overall and each team will be worse in the 2020 season, except for the Lions. And we're going to go into that and why that is a little bit. I think the Packers, I mean, really looking at their kind of bizarre offseason with Matt LaFleur, the first full offseason with their new head coach. I mean, it's really interesting to see them load up for the future. They drafted A.J. Dillon, a running back, for the future. They drafted quarterback Jordan Love for the future. And this team really hasn't done anything else in terms of free agency. They had really no key signings. They didn't really have so many key just losses on the offensive or defensive side. I know they lost one of their best offensive linemen in Brian Bulaga. They swapped him for Ricky Wagner, who really is not nearly as good of a right tackle as Brian Bulaga is. So again, they did lose Blake Martinez. They signed Christian Kirksey in addition for that, but again, just really no key signings for the Packers, and I see the Packers getting worse than they were last season.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that hurts a lot of teams in the NFL is the teams around them getting better. Not for this in this case, we're not going to talk about the division getting better, but I mean, all the NFC teams got better. I mean, the Buccaneers got better. They made moves. The Cowboys got better. They made moves, and the Packers just stayed the same, and they stayed stagnant. So I can't see them finishing with a better record when other teams are getting better personnel on their teams and better weapons for their quarterbacks and stuff like that. I mean, the Packers, I don't think they'll be able to be as good as they were last year.
Yeah, I really think the Packers Super Bowl window in the Aaron Rodgers era has closed, and that's really sad to think that they've had two Hall of Fame quarterbacks, two great quarterbacks, really, for the past 25 years almost, and they only have 3 Super Bowl appearances to show out of it, 2 rings to show out of it. So they really did waste the prime of Aaron Rodgers, in a sense, the tail end of Aaron Rodgers' career, and they're really transitioning into the future with Matt LaFleur with this offseason of really not committing any of their cap to any players for the immediate fashion and signing the running back for the future in the draft and drafting their quarterback for the future, again, in the draft, trading up. So really a smart offseason for the Packers if you want to win later on in the decade, but really stupid considering they went 13-3 last season. They were a really good team last season, and to not really capitalize on this small window you have with your Hall of Fame quarterback really is puzzling to me.
And moving on to the next team, the Vikings, they lost some key players. They lost Everson Griffin, Linval Joseph, Trey Waynes, Stephon Diggs, just to name a few. So they got a little bit worse as well. I mean, they did trade Stephon Diggs for Justin Jefferson, but Justin Jefferson, he's a rookie. He's unproven in the NFL. Stephon Diggs is considered one of the best deep threats in the whole league. And I mean, also losing Everson Griffin and Linval Joseph, kind of their 2 rocks on their defensive line. I mean, they got a lot worse than they got worse. They didn't get better. I mean, that's like the Packers. I mean, a lot of this team, I don't know, the Vikings, they do have a great coach. They have a good offense. I can see them finishing at top of this division. I think it's gonna be a competitive division between them, the Packers, and maybe the Lions. But I think the Vikings will finish number one in the division.
Yeah, unless they really sweep the division in terms of divisional games, I really think the Vikings have 9-7 written all over them. They replace some key veteran players on the offensive and defensive side with rookies. Now, I do think the Vikings were one of the winners of the 2020 NFL draft, but still to have so many rookies be so in such key players in such key positions, I think it's just kind of disastrous looking at it on paper. You have so many defensive players through the draft, later on in the draft, they're going to have to step up and play significant playing time for this Vikings team. And I think the biggest loss for this Vikings team was the loss of their offensive coordinator, Kevin Stefanski, that signed as the Browns head coach. I think he's such a great offensive coordinator. He did so many wonders for Kirk Cousins in the play action game. And with their running back, Dalvin Cook, potentially holding out as well, I think this could be a very down year for the Vikings. I would still suspect them to be very competitive in the division. I still think they are going to push for a playoff spot, but I do not think they're going to be able to replicate a 10-6 record next year.
Yeah, I mean, I think they can definitely go 9-7. I think this is going to be one of those divisions that have a really low record that takes the division title. So I can see them going 9-7, or even 8-8, and winning the division.
Certainly, I mean, if they end up winning all these division games, if they sweep the Packers, sweep the Bears, sweep the Lions, I could see this team winning 12 wins. But I mean, in terms of other teams in the NFC, in terms of just other teams in the NFL in general, the Vikings certainly got worse this offseason, and they're certainly worse than they were last year, even if they could have potentially a better record next year because their division got so much worse, in my opinion.
Yeah, so moving on to the next team, the Chicago Bears. Obviously, the biggest story for them is trading for the very large contract of Nick Foles and having him compete against their young quarterback, Mitch Trubisky. I mean, they drafted Mitch Trubisky to be the future of their franchise. I mean, throughout the whole history of the Bears, they've never had a franchise quarterback, and they thought they had that with Mitch Trubisky, and it turned out it is not correct. So they're going to have a quarterback battle between Nick Foles and Mitch Trubisky. I mean, having the great defense that they do have and then not being able to solidify the offensive side of the ball is really going to hurt them a lot. I mean, a lot of people say defense wins championships. Defense is kind of the most important side of part of the game, but having such a bad offensive side, if you're not going to be able to score points, I don't see them being able to win a lot of games.
Yeah, and I know this Bears team kind of upgraded at the quarterback position slightly, in my opinion. But looking at their offseason, I really think they're one of the losers of this offseason. I know defense in the NFL is the least inconsistent, or is the most inconsistent unit year to year. Offense is much more consistent carrying over from year to year. And we saw a slight dip in the Bears defense from 2018 to 2019. And I think a large reason of that is because the offense put them in pretty bad positions, bad field positions, but still the defense wasn't as good as they were in 2018. And looking at the guys they lost on defense, they lost their linebacker, Leonard Floyd. They lost their linebacker, Nick Kwiatkowski. They lost their linebacker, Kevin Pierre-Louis. They lost HaHa Clinton-Dix. They lost some really good defensive players, including Prince Amukamara as well. So I don't really think they replaced any of these players really appropriately in the offseason. I know they signed guys like Robert Quinn, guys like Mingo that are going to try to replace some of their key defensive losses, but I see the Bears defense taking a step back, and because of that, I do see this Bears team as a whole taking a step back as well.
Yeah, I think they're going to take a considerable step back as well. I mean, Matt Nagy kind of, with Mitch Trubisky, kind of had to limit some of his offensive creativity, because when he signed with the Bears as the head coach, people had said he's such a great offensive mind, but with Mitch at quarterback, he kind of he couldn't be as creative as he wanted to be. So maybe if Nick Foles wins this quarterback battle, he's going to be able to open up a lot of things. But Nick Foles just has flaws in his games too. He's not as elusive and able to run the ball as Mitch Trubisky is able to run the ball as he is or he was when he was the starter. So I mean, you take one quarterback and put in the other, and kind of their games are kind of opposite because Nick Foles can throw the ball better than Mitch Trubisky, but then Mitch Trubisky can run the ball better than Nick Foles. So, I mean, which case do you really want to take in this aspect?
Yeah, I'm sure Nick Foles is going to start off the season, but I would not be surprised to see Mitch Trubisky play again for the Bears at some point in the season. But transitioning into the last team in this division, in terms of record last year, it's the Lions. And year in and year out in the NFL, we see teams go from last to first in their division from year to year. And I think more than any other division in the NFL, more than any other team in the NFL, the Lions have the best chance to do so. I know they only won 3 games last year, but I do think they had a pretty good offseason. They got Jamie Collins, they got Nick Williams, they got Danny Shelton, they got Desmond Trufant for the defensive side of the ball. Now I know they didn't really get much better on the offensive side of the ball, but they are getting their star quarterback Matt Stafford back, who I think is a perennial top 10 quarterback when healthy in the NFL. So with all things considered, they still have a very good offensive just repertoire of weapons. So I do think this Lions team is going to be much, much better than their record and their team as a whole was last season. I would predict this team to win at least 6 or 7 games. And I really do think on paper and going into next year, they can be better than every single one of these teams in this division.
And also, adding on to the point of their offseason, they had a pretty great draft as well. I mean, drafting Jeff Okudah. They drafted DeAndre Swift in the second round, which many argued as him being the best running back in the whole draft. And then in the third round, they got a steal with Julian Okwara from Notre Dame, which he's a pretty physical defensive end. So they're adding key pieces on their defensive side of the ball, adding DeAndre Swift to take some load off Matthew Stafford. I mean, the Matt Patricia era is really coming into place now with all of the moves he's made on the defensive side of the ball. And I can see them in 2 or 3 years, the Lions becoming the premier team in this division.
Yeah, and I mean, if the Lions aren't good next season, I think Matt Patricia should get fired. I mean, he's gotten so many signings on the defensive side of the ball over the past couple of years. He has the offense that can make the playoffs. It's really all about this Lions defense. Can they end up getting it done for this team? So again, I know Matt Patricia and the culture he's set for Detroit has really been in question for some players, such as Darius Slay, who ended up leaving because of problems with Matt Patricia. So I think, again, if Matt Patricia is not able to get it done for this Lions team, he should be on the hot seat.
Yeah. So what's your order for this division? What do you think the final standings for this division will be at the end of the year?
I'm going to have my first hot take, really, of this divisional breakdown. I think the Lions are going to be first in this division. I know that's saying a lot, worst to first, but I do think it happens every single year in the NFL, and I do think the Lions are going to be the team to do it. I predict the Packers being second, Vikings being third, and the Bears being fourth in this division next year, but I do think the Vikings and the Packers could really fight for a playoff position as well.
That's very, very hot take with the Lions at the top.
Yeah.
I don't know when the last time the Lions were able to win this division. I think they've been at the bottom for quite some time now. But I'm gonna go with the Vikings winning the division. I think they're gonna win kind of at a lower record, 10-6, 9-7.
Yeah.
Maybe even 8-8. And then I'm gonna go with the Packers in the second place, then the Lions, and then the Bears at the bottom, despite them being a playoff team 2 years ago.